Hey, beautiful souls. Are you ready for a journey from heartbreak to hope? From the ashes of rejection to the flames of true love? Tonight, we're diving deep into a world where the moon decides your fate, where ancient bloodlines hold deadly secrets, and where sometimes the mate bond gets it devastatingly wrong the first time around. I need you to buckle up because we're about to meet Lyra Nightshade, a woman whose world is about to shatter in the most brutal way possible. But here's what I want you to remember as we begin. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover who we're retroly meant to become. Are you with me? Then let's step into the silver moon territory on the night that changed everything. Chapter 1. The wind howled through the trees as the full moon rose high in the sky, casting its silver light over the packed territory. The air was thick with tension, a mix of excitement and dread. It was Lyra's 21st birthday, and the ceremony was about to begin. The moment every wolf awaited, the mate bonding ceremony. A sacred tradition, one that marked the beginning of a new chapter, a new life. But for Lyra, it felt more like a countdown to the end. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart hammering in her chest. The other pack members were gathered in a loose circle, their eyes on the central altar where the alpha, her mate-to-be, would declare the bond between them. They were all watching. They always watched. Her breath hitched in her throat as she felt the familiar pull of the bond. Intangible but strong, a connection that was supposed to be inevitable, comforting. It was supposed to be the most beautiful moment of her life. But it wasn't. She glanced toward Marcus, the future alpha, who stood beside his father at the altar. His broad shoulders and regal presence made him seem untouchable, perfect. Everything she was not. Ordinary. Weak. The words echoed in her mind, the cruel echo of every insult she'd ever received. He hadn't even looked her way, his eyes focused on the crowd. The weight of it sank into her chest like a stone. The ceremony began, the chanting of the elders filling the air. Lyra's hands trembled as she held out the ceremonial necklace, her gift to Marcus, her symbol of devotion. The pack gasped, their attention shifting between the necklace and her. Marcus stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He reached for the necklace, but before she could fasten it around his neck, he held up his hand. "I reject this bond," he said, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. Lyra froze. The world around her spun. A murmur swept through the pack, a shock wave that made her dizzy. It was as if the very earth had shifted beneath her feet. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I reject Lyra Nightshade as my mate." His words were cold, his gaze distant. "She is too weak, unworthy of the alpha bond." The sting of his rejection hit her like a physical blow. The air felt suddenly heavy, suffocating. Her heart pounded in her ears, and the world began to fade to black at the edges. She tried to breathe, but her chest tightened, as though the very essence of her soul had been ripped away. "You can't do this," she cried, the words spilling out in desperation. The pack remained silent, their eyes avoiding hers, unwilling to witness the aftermath of Marcus's decision. But they didn't have to say anything. His rejection spoke louder than words ever could. As the realization sunk in, Lyra felt the bond, a pull that had always been so powerful, so present, snap. It was like a chain breaking inside her, leaving a hollow emptiness where warmth had once been. She didn't look at Marcus again. Instead, she turned and fled into the night, her wolf form rising to meet the call. Her feet hit the ground, and in a heartbeat she was running, leaving the pack, leaving her past, leaving everything she had ever known behind. Her mind was a blur, emotions swirling like a storm, her wolf instinct driving her forward. The only thought in her mind was escape. Escape from the shame, from the hurt, from the rejection. She ran until her muscles screamed in protest, until the borders of the pack's land blurred behind her. But still she didn't stop. She couldn't. The weight of the rejection still held her tight, suffocating, and she needed to get far, far away. And then, when her legs could no longer carry her, when the world around her seemed too much to bear, she stumbled into a stream, her body collapsing against the cold rocks. Her wolf curled around her, offering comfort in the form of warmth. She lay there for what felt like an eternity, her tears mixing with the water, the moonlight above casting an eerie glow on the world around her. That's when it happened. A flash of cold, icy cold, rushed over her. The frost spread from her feet, creeping up her body, coating her in an unnatural chill. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something else entirely. Magic. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. the power that had been dormant within her all this time. It was alive, the first spark of her inheritance, the magic of the moon witch bloodline. Chapter 2. The cold had a life of its own. It didn't just come from the night air. It seeped from the ground beneath her, spreading through her limbs like ice in her veins. Lyra's heart beat erratically in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she lay by the stream. The frost on her skin was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It was as if the world had shifted, as if everything she knew, her body, her mind, her very soul, had been remade. Her fingers tingled, and she stared at the ice creeping along the edges of her skin. It was beautiful in a way. Frost bloomed around her hands like delicate flowers, but it was also terrifying. She wasn't sure whether to fear it or embrace it. It felt like a warning, a message from the universe, or perhaps from the very magic she had always thought was a myth. Her wolf, sensing her distress, whimpered softly beside her. But the coldness in her heart was not so easily soothed. How could she trust this magic, this power that had just appeared? How could she trust herself? The world felt alien now, as though she had stepped into a different dimension where everything she had known before was useless. She wasn't part of the pack anymore. Marcus had made that clear. And with the bond severed, there was no going back. She was no longer bound to anyone, not even to the world she had once thought she belonged to. But her instincts were loud. They whispered of freedom, a freedom she hadn't known she craved. Maybe it was time to embrace this power, this new path. As the chill deepened, Lyra pushed herself up, her hands still trembling. Her wolf nudged her forward, urging her to rise. She did shakily, her eyes scanning the darkness. There was nothing familiar about the woods around her. Everything felt distant, alien. But then she heard it, a low growl in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of paws against the earth. Her senses sharpened, the cool air stirring a rush of adrenaline through her body. She wasn't alone. From the shadows emerged a figure. A tall, dark figure with piercing eyes that gleamed with an ancient power. The man's posture was commanding, his very presence enough to make the air feel thick with authority. Lyra instinctively backed away, her wolf on alert. "Easy, little wolf." The man's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight to it, like he was someone who could crush her without a second thought but chose not to. "I mean you no harm." Lyra's breath caught in her throat as the man's eyes met hers. His gaze wasn't cold or dismissive, like Marcus's had been. It was knowing, as if he could see through the very core of her. "I've been waiting for you," he continued, his tone almost gentle despite his intimidating presence. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Waiting for her? How could he know about her? She was no one. "Who are you?" she managed, her voice shaking, though she tried to sound firm. The man stepped closer, his dark hair falling into his face, a few silver strands glinting under the moonlight. His smile was small, but there was something reassuring about it. "I am Kieran Thorne," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of authority. "And you are not as alone as you think." The words struck her like a blow. Not alone. How could he know the emptiness she felt inside, the gaping hole left by Marcus's rejection? I don't understand," Lyra whispered. "I don't belong anywhere." Kieran tilted his head, his eyes narrowing in understanding. "You belong here with me, and I can help you, but only if you trust me." Trust. The word felt foreign, like a lost concept. She hadn't trusted anyone in so long, not since the moment Marcus had cast her aside. But Kieran's presence felt different. His voice held a quiet power, one that didn't demand respect, but earned it naturally. "I've seen your kind before," Kieran continued, his voice softening. "Wolves with magic running through their blood. Moon witches. But that's a secret they don't want you to know. They won't teach you about it. They want to control you. But I won't. You can learn how to control this power, Lyra. You can use it to protect yourself and those you care about." Lyra was silent, the words sinking in slowly. Her magic. It wasn't just some curse. It was a gift. Something that made her special, not weak. "But why should I trust you?" Lyra asked, her voice steady now despite the lingering doubt. "I don't even know you." Kieran's expression softened, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite read. "Because you don't have to be alone anymore. You have a choice now, and I will help you find your way." Something in Lyra shifted at his words. The burden she had carried for so long, the rejection, the shame, began to feel a little lighter. There was something about Kieran that made her want to believe him, to trust him. Maybe this was the chance she needed to start over, to learn what she was truly capable of. The road ahead would be hard, but it was better than the one behind her. "All right," she said softly, the weight of her decision settling around her. "I'll follow you." Kieran nodded, his smile returning. "Good. Then we have much work to do." As they moved deeper into the woods, Lyra felt a sense of anticipation building inside her. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Chapter 3. Lyra had never imagined that training could feel like this. The cold that had once been so alien, so frightening, now felt like an old friend. An extension of herself, something she could call her own. Kieran had led her to a secluded part of the forest, far away from prying eyes, where the moonlight filtered through the trees in silvery beams. It was here, in the heart of the ancient woods, that Kieran had begun to teach her. The first lesson had been simple, though no less daunting: control. The magic that had burst forth from her without warning needed to be harnessed. She had to learn it, not let it control her. It felt like trying to hold a wildfire in her hands. "Focus," Kieran's deep voice echoed in the stillness. "Feel the power inside you, but don't let it consume you. Let it flow like a river, not a storm." Lyra nodded, but inside, doubt twisted like a knot in her stomach. She wasn't sure how to control something she barely understood. What if the magic was too powerful for her to handle? What if she lost herself to it, like so many others before her? Kieran, sensing her hesitation, stepped closer. "Let the magic rise," he said softly. "Think of it like a breath, slow, steady. Don't fight it." Lyra closed her eyes and took a deep breath, drawing in the cool night air. She tried to clear her mind, focusing on the deep pull within her, the icy power that stirred just beneath the surface. At first, it was just a tingle in her fingertips. But as she concentrated, the frost began to spread again, swirling around her hands like delicate snowflakes. The temperature dropped in the air, the atmosphere thick with the weight of her magic. But it wasn't just frost this time. As her control grew, the ice moved. Sculptures formed in the air, intricate and beautiful. Barriers of solid ice rose from the ground, shimmering like diamonds in the moonlight. Her heart raced with excitement. She was doing it. She was controlling it. "Good," Kieran said, his voice full of approval. "Now try shaping it. Take your emotion and mold it into something useful. Anger, joy, sadness. Each one will give you a different form of magic. Don't force it. Let it happen naturally." Lyra frowned in concentration. She thought of the hurt, the anger that still burned in her chest from the rejection. Her breath quickened, and the ice around her began to take shape again. This time more erratic, a bit too wild. The frost spiraled upward, twisting into sharp spikes, jagged and dangerous. "Stop," Kieran commanded. "Remember, your magic reflects you. Control it, or it will control you." Lyra blinked, realizing the danger in her emotions. She drew in another deep breath, willing herself to calm. The ice softened, the spikes dissolving into a smooth, reflective surface that shimmered like a mirror. "Better," Kieran said, his tone softer now. "You're learning. Keep practicing, and soon your power will be a part of you, not something you fear." For the next few hours, Lyra practiced, pushing herself to shape the magic, to create beauty from the chaos within her. The more she learned, the more the frost felt like a part of her. It was no longer just magic. It was an extension of her soul, a reflection of her deepest emotions. As the night wore on, Lyra felt herself growing more comfortable with the power inside her. But it wasn't just the magic she was learning to control. It was herself. Later that evening, they sat by a small campfire Kieran had made. Lyra stared into the flames, her thoughts swirling. She hadn't asked him much about himself, but now, as the night sky stretched out above them, she couldn't help but wonder. "So, how did you come to know about the Moon Witch bloodline?" she asked, breaking the silence. Kieran's gaze turned to her, and for a moment his eyes softened, just the slightest hint of vulnerability in his expression. "I lost someone once," he said quietly. "A true mate. The bond was devastating." He paused, looking away into the fire. "I've seen magic like yours before. It's not something most wolves understand, but I do." Lyra's heart twisted in her chest, a pang of sympathy for the pain he carried. He had lost someone. The thought made her feel a strange connection to him. She knew the sting of rejection all too well. But what had he meant by true mate? "True mate?" Lyra asked, her curiosity piqued. Kieran's lips tightened for a moment. Then he sighed. It's the bond between two wolves that goes beyond any other. The bond that can't be broken, no matter what. The kind of bond one had with her. His voice turned softer, tinged with loss. But it was taken from me, by forces I couldn't control. Lyra nodded slowly, her heart aching for him. I'm sorry, she said, her voice soft, genuine. Kieran gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But now, I've made it my mission to help others. Especially those who've been given the gift of magic, like you. Lyra looked up at him, her mind racing with possibilities. There was so much she didn't understand yet, but with Kieran's guidance, she was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely broken. Maybe this magic, this connection with him, could lead her to something more. Before she could say anything else, Kieran stood, brushing off his clothes. We'll train again tomorrow. Get some rest. Lyra nodded, her mind still racing with everything she had learned. But as she lay down, her wolf curled up beside her for warmth. Something else lingered in her chest, the pull. Not just the pull of the magic, but something deeper, something more. She couldn't deny it. There was something about Kieran that called to her, something she hadn't felt since before the rejection. But she couldn't get ahead of herself. She needed to focus. She needed to learn. Chapter 4. Lyra's training continued in the secluded woods, far from the watchful eyes of the world she had left behind. The forest had become her sanctuary, but even in this peaceful place, there was a tension that clung to her like a shadow, the weight of her power. Every day she practiced, shaping ice sculptures, creating barriers, controlling the chaotic storms that brewed within her. But today was different. Today, Kieran had said it was time to push her further, to test her limits. You've come far, Lyra, Kieran said, his voice steady, unwavering as he looked at her. But you need to understand, power has a price. She nodded, already feeling the weight of his words. They had discussed this before. The danger of magic, the temptation to let it consume her. But now it felt more real than ever. It felt as though she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't quite see yet, but that was waiting to pull her in. Kieran stepped back, his dark eyes studying her intently. I want you to summon a storm, a blizzard, but you must control it, completely. If you can, you'll have learned the true depth of your power. Lyra swallowed hard, her hands trembling. A blizzard. She had never attempted anything like that before. She had barely learned to control the smaller manifestations, the delicate ice sculptures that bloomed from her fingers when she concentrated. But this was on a completely different level. I'm not sure I can do that, she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. You can, Kieran said firmly, his gaze unwavering. The only thing holding you back is your fear. The fear that you're not worthy of the power you possess. Lyra flinched at his words. He was right, though. Fear had been the thing that held her back from truly embracing her magic. Fear of losing control. Fear of what might happen if she unleashed the full force of her power. But if she didn't try, she'd never know what she was capable of. And if she didn't know that, how could she ever find peace? With a deep breath, Lyra closed her eyes and centered herself. She could feel the ice within her, stirring like a sleeping giant just beneath her skin. She summoned it forward, focused all her energy into her hands, feeling the frost spread up her arms, filling her body with cold. The air around her grew thick with tension, and she could almost taste the magic, sharp and metallic, in the air. Slowly, she lifted her hands, her fingers twitching as the ice began to form. She concentrated, drawing the power up from deep inside her, feeling it surge through her veins like wildfire. The wind around her picked up, swirling, howling in response to her call. Lyra could feel the temperature dropping, the storm brewing just at the edge of her control. The frost spread, spiraling into the air, coalescing into a swirling mass of snowflakes. But it wasn't just snow anymore. The air crackled with raw power, the magic becoming a beast, threatening to break free from her grasp. Lyra, Kieran's voice cut through the howling wind. Focus. You have to control it. You can't let it consume you. His words broke through her panic, and she gritted her teeth, pushing past the fear. She could do this. She had to. With a cry, she pushed the magic outward. Gently, carefully, trying to shape it into something beautiful, something manageable. The blizzard slowed, the wind softening, the snowflakes shifting into an intricate pattern that danced in the air. The ice sculptures formed again, this time larger, more intricate, almost alive in their movement. But it wasn't perfect. The storm still raged at the edges of her control, swirling in unpredictable patterns. Lyra's heart raced as she fought to maintain her grip on the magic. The air was so cold now that she could see her breath in the frozen space around her. "You're losing it," Kieran called out, urgency creeping into his voice. "Control, Lyra. You're stronger than this." The words hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't strong enough. She couldn't hold the storm back. She could feel it growing inside her, twisting into something more chaotic, more dangerous. She had to end it. Now. But as she reached out to disperse the storm, a flicker of emotion, a burst of anger, fear, and frustration, triggered an unexpected surge in the magic. The blizzard exploded outward, a violent wind tearing through the clearing, knocking Kieran back as he struggled to stay grounded. Lyra cried out, her heart pounding as she lost control completely. The storm roared, wild and free, as if it had taken on a life of its own. It felt like a part of her was disappearing into it. Kieran's voice was drowned out by the wind, but she could see him now, his figure outlined against the raging snow. He was trying to fight the storm, but it was clear that the magic had become too much for her. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar. "Stop. Focus." Desperation twisted in her chest. She had to end it. She had to control it. She closed her eyes, reaching deep inside herself, pushing past the panic that threatened to swallow her. And then, with a fierce determination, she did the only thing she could think of. She centered herself. Slowly, carefully, she turned the storm inward, drawing it back. The ice melted, the snowflakes evaporated, and the wind died down. The clearing was silent once more, save for the sound of her own labored breathing. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the ground, exhausted, her body trembling with the effort. Kieran was at her side in an instant, his strong hands steadying her. "You did well," he said quietly, his voice full of warmth and approval. "You held the storm in check longer than I expected." Lyra looked up at him, her breath shaky. "I almost lost control." "You did," Kieran agreed. "But you didn't. And that's what matters. You're stronger than you think." His words were like a balm to the rawness of her emotions. But even as he spoke, Lyra couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened. Power wasn't just about control. It was about responsibility. "I can't let this consume me," she whispered, the realization sinking in. Kieran nodded, his gaze intense. "And you won't. You'll learn. You're not alone in this." Chapter 5. The morning sun broke through the trees, casting a soft golden light over the forest clearing. Lyra sat by the campfire, her eyes trained on the swirling patterns of frost that danced around her fingers. The air had a crispness to it, and the temperature felt almost perfect, a balance she had never known until now. Her heart was still racing from the training session the night before. She had never felt more alive, more empowered than she did in the aftermath of the storm. She had faced the chaos of her magic and survived. But now, as the days passed, something inside her was changing. Not just in the magic, but in her heart. She glanced over at Kieran, who was sharpening a blade with precise movements. He had always been by her side, guiding her through the chaos, but something had shifted between them. An unspoken bond that neither of them had acknowledged, but both of them felt. "Feeling better?" Kieran asked, not looking up from his task. His voice was calm, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of emotions that swirled within her. Lyra nodded, though she felt a flicker of uncertainty. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to understand how to control it. A little better, anyway." Kieran gave a small smile, the edges of his lips curling slightly. "Good. It takes time. You're doing better than I thought you would." Her heart swelled at his praise, but before she could respond, a voice, one she had never thought she would hear again, cut through the quiet of the woods. "Lyra." The name fell like a stone in the air, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Lyra's blood ran cold, and she turned slowly, her heart clenching in her chest. There he was, Marcus, her ex-mate, the future alpha of the pack she had once belonged to. He stood a few paces away, his dark eyes locked onto hers, his expression a mixture of regret and determination. His presence was like a shadow that stretched across the clearing, darkening the space between her and everything she had come to embrace. "Marcus," she said, her voice cold, even though her heart was anything but. Kieran immediately stood, his stance shifting to one of readiness, his eyes scanning Marcus with an intensity that spoke of caution. "Why are you here?" Lyra asked, keeping her voice steady. She felt the pull of their bond. Still there, but now it felt like a distant echo, a shadow of what it had been. "I came to talk," Marcus said, his voice low but urgent. "We need to talk, Lyra." Lyra's chest tightened at the words. She had heard this before, the empty promises, the apologies, the words that always rang hollow after the rejection. But this time it felt different. The man before her was no longer the one she had once believed in. The power dynamics had shifted, and the sting of betrayal still lingered. "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, though it carried the weight of years of hurt. Marcus took a step forward, but Kieran's stance grew more protective. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough, a silent warning that made Marcus hesitate. "Lyra, please," Marcus said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I made a mistake. I was wrong to reject you. You're not ordinary. You're special. I was too proud, too focused on the pack and my role as alpha. But I see now. I was a fool. You're powerful, and you belong with me. You belong to the pack." Lyra's heart pounded, but not from affection. The words were poison, a twisted reminder of the lies he had fed her for years. She wasn't his. She was no one's. She had spent too long fighting for someone who hadn't cared for her. And now, with the magic inside her awakening, she was realizing that she didn't need to fight for his approval anymore. "No," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "I don't belong with you. I never did." The words cut through the air like ice, and Marcus's face faltered, the mask of the alpha cracking for just a moment. Lyra saw the pain in his eyes, the remorse, but it was too late. He had rejected her when she needed him most. And now she had found something greater, something real. "You're right, Lyra," Marcus said, his voice softening. "I don't deserve you. But please, give me a chance to make things right. We can still be." "No," Kieran interrupted, stepping forward, his voice low but commanding. "She doesn't owe you anything. Leave, Marcus." Lyra didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? But the most powerful emotion of all was gratitude. Gratitude for Kieran's unwavering support. He hadn't even known the full extent of her pain, but he had always respected her choice. He hadn't tried to control her or claim her. He had given her the freedom to decide. Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening as he looked from Lyra to Kieran. Then, with a final, regretful glance at her, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Lyra watched him go, the bond between them finally severing completely. The weight in her chest lifted just slightly, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of hurt. She was free now, but freedom came at a price, the price of letting go of the past. Kieran remained silent beside her, his presence a steady anchor. She wanted to say something, anything, but no words seemed to fit. Instead, she simply nodded at him, her gaze meeting his. There was a quiet understanding between them now, something more than just trainer and student. "You didn't have to defend me," Lyra said, her voice soft. "I did," Kieran replied, his voice steady. "No one will hurt you again, Lyra. Not while I'm here." For a moment, the air between them shifted. It wasn't just the magic anymore, or the training. It was something more. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. Chapter 6. The air was thick with anticipation. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath coming in shallow bursts as she tried to calm the swirling storm within her. She could feel it, the magic constantly simmering beneath her skin, waiting to be unleashed. But this time, she wasn't just training in the safety of the forest. This time, there were consequences. Kieran stood beside her, his presence grounding, but his eyes were fixed on the gathering crowd. The council had arrived, with their enforcers flanking them, silent, powerful figures who exuded authority. The tension between them and Kieran was palpable, but it was the trial that Lyra was most concerned about. The council had demanded a demonstration, a trial by combat, to prove her control over her magic. They didn't believe she was capable of mastering the ice magic that ran through her veins. They wanted to see if she could truly wield it without losing herself to its destructive potential. The wind picked up, and Lyra could feel the cold creeping in, her magic responding to her nerves, already beginning to swirl around her like an invisible storm. "Focus," she told herself. "You've trained for this." Across from her, two enforcers from the council stepped forward. They were both skilled fighters, warriors who had been trained to use their magic in battle. They had come prepared, knowing that this trial wouldn't just be about proving Lyra's control. It would be a test of strength and endurance, a challenge to see if she was truly ready to face the power within her. One of the enforcers, A tall man with silver hair raised his hand, signaling the start of the combat. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. "Show us, Lyra." Kieran's voice was low but firm, full of belief. "Prove to them that you can control this power." Lyra's heart skipped a beat at his words. He wasn't just speaking to her as her mentor. He was speaking to her as someone who believed in her, someone who saw her for who she was becoming. She took a deep breath, feeling the frost spreading from her feet. The cold was familiar now, the ice dancing along her skin like a second layer of armor. But there was something else this time, a deep well of strength she hadn't known existed. The magic wasn't just raw power. It was part of her, part of who she had always been. She had been running from it for so long, but now, she was ready to face it. The two enforcers lunged, their movements swift and calculated. The first one, a woman with dark, braided hair, swung a blade made of pure energy, aiming for Lyra's side. Lyra barely had time to react, but she raised her arm, and a wall of ice sprang up in front of her, the impact of the sword leaving only a faint crack in the surface. The crowd gasped, and Lyra felt the rush of triumph surge through her. She wasn't just defending herself, she was controlling the magic, making it respond to her will. But there was no time to celebrate. The second enforcer was already on her, using his magic to summon fire, a deadly combination of heat and aggression. The flames shot toward her, but Lyra didn't panic. Instead, she closed her eyes, focusing on the cold on the ice. With a scream of exertion, she thrust her hand forward, creating a blizzard that collided with the fire, the icy winds snuffing out the flames in an instant. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as the two elements clashed. But even as she stood firm, she felt the strain of the battle. Her magic was feeding off her emotions, and she was beginning to lose focus. The storm around her began to rage again, more chaotic this time, threatening to spiral out of control. "No," Kieran's voice broke through the storm. "Control. Focus on your center, Lyra." She could hear the urgency in his voice, but it was his belief in her that gave her the strength to refocus. Control. She could feel the power inside her, but this time, she would not let it consume her. She had learned enough, trained enough. She was not weak. Lyra took a deep breath, grounding herself, pushing through the swirling chaos. She raised her hand, and slowly, the storm began to calm. The blizzard subsided, the snowflakes settling into a beautiful, controlled swirl. The ice sculptures around her shimmered, delicate and intricate. She had brought the storm to heel. The two enforcers stood back, their faces unreadable, but there was a sense of respect in their eyes now. The council had underestimated her, and she had proven them wrong. But the battle wasn't over. The tall man with silver hair stepped forward, his expression hardening as he called for the final test, the bond breaker. A device, sleek and black, was placed in the center of the clearing. It was designed to sever the mate bond, a weapon that could tear apart the very connection between two wolves. The council had wanted to see if Lyra could handle it, the emotional destruction of losing her bond with Marcus. Kieran's eyes widened as the device powered up, but he didn't move. He stood firm beside her, his presence a silent promise. Lyra's heart clenched, the weight of the bond still lingering. But now it wasn't just about Marcus. It was about her future, about her freedom. She wasn't going to let the past define her anymore. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, and with a burst of power, she shattered the bond-breaking device. The sharp, metallic sound of its destruction echoed through the clearing, and the energy in the air shifted. The council was silent. Chapter 7. The clearing was eerily quiet after the trial by combat. Lyra's victory echoed in her chest, but it was a hollow triumph. The air was thick with the weight of her emotions, her heart still pounding from the battle, from the fear that had gripped her during the fight. She had proven herself, proved to the council, to the world, and perhaps most importantly to herself, that she was in control of her magic. But control came at a cost. The bond breaker had been the final test, the final challenge. And even though she had shattered it with ease, there was a lingering emptiness in the space between her and Marcus. The bond, the connection that had once felt like a chain binding her to him, was gone now, severed. But in its place, she felt only freedom, a freedom she didn't fully understand. "Lyra." Kieran's voice broke through the silence, and she turned to face him. His expression was unreadable, but she could see the quiet concern in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he looked at her. "You did well," he said, his voice steady, but there was a weight to it. But you know the battle isn't over. The council won't let this go. Lyra nodded, her heart sinking at the truth of his words. The victory had been hard-earned, but it wasn't the end of her fight. The council wasn't done with her yet. They had seen her power, and now they would come for her with everything they had. I know, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. I can't stop now. I won't let them control me. Kieran stepped closer, his presence a comforting force as he placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face this alone, Lyra. Not anymore. Her breath hitched at his words. She didn't know how to respond. Not when every part of her wanted to lean into him, to trust him. There was something in his touch, something in the way he stood by her, that made her feel safe. But she had been alone for so long, and letting someone in felt dangerous. But now, more than ever, she needed to trust. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice breaking, the weight of everything crashing down on her. I don't know if I can keep controlling it. I've never felt this powerful before. Kieran's eyes softened, and he took a step closer, his gaze locked onto hers. That's because you are powerful, Lyra. You don't have to fight it. You just have to understand it. And you're not alone in that. The warmth of his words soothed her in a way she hadn't expected. She was used to being the strong one, the one who didn't need help, the one who pushed through everything on her own. But here, with Kieran, it was different. Here, she didn't have to be alone. I'll stand by you, he said, his voice low and steady, his hand still on her shoulder. Always. Lyra felt something stir inside her at his words. A bond, unspoken but undeniable. She didn't know what it was, but she couldn't ignore it. It was there, in the way his touch sent sparks of warmth through her, in the way his presence steadied her when everything around her felt like it was crumbling. Before she could respond, the sound of hooves broke the moment. The air shifted, and Lyra turned to see a figure emerging from the trees. A messenger from the council, his face grim as he rode toward them. Lyra Nightshade, the messenger called, his voice cold. The council demands your presence. Now, the words hit her like a slap. Her stomach churned, and the sense of dread that had been hovering on the edges of her mind surged forward. They were coming for her again. The council wasn't done yet. I'll go with you, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her gut. But I won't bow to their demands. I will not be controlled. The messenger didn't respond, merely nodding and turning his horse toward the distant clearing where the council awaited. Kieran stood beside her, his expression unreadable, but Lyra could feel the tension between them. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The journey to the council's stronghold was long, the silence between them uncomfortable. The wind had picked up, the air growing colder with each passing minute. Lyra could feel the storm inside her rising again, a reminder of how close she was to losing control. The magic had a life of its own, and it wanted to be free. But freedom didn't come without consequences. As they approached the stone gates of the council's fortress, Lyra felt the weight of her past, the weight of her rejection, the weight of the bond she had severed. But more than that, she felt something else, a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for something bigger, something that could change the world for the magical wolves who had been oppressed for too long. Kieran's presence beside her was a steadying force, but she knew that she had to face this alone. The council would try to break her, to strip her of everything she had fought for. But she wasn't the same girl who had fled the pack all those weeks ago. She wasn't afraid anymore. The council might try to control her, but Lyra was done being anyone's puppet. She would fight back. This was just the beginning. Heightens the stakes for Lyra, as she faces the council and prepares for a battle that will test both her magical control and her resolve. Chapter 8. The gates of the council's stronghold loomed ahead, cold stone and sharp edges, a fortress of tradition and control. As the messenger guided them inside, Lyra could feel the weight of the walls pressing down on her. Walls that had once kept her safe, but now only served to keep others trapped. The council had created this place to govern magic, to control those like her. And today they would see the full extent of what they had feared. Lyra walked through the grand hall, the echoes of her footsteps a constant reminder of the path she had chosen. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of cloaks and the murmur of voices. The elders of the council standing in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable, their gazes sharp and calculating. At the center, a stone pedestal stood, the place where she would be judged. Kieran remained at her side, his presence a steadying force, but even he couldn't mask the tension in the air. Lyra could feel the pull of her magic, urging her to be strong, to stand tall in the face of what was coming. She wasn't the girl who had run away in fear. She wasn't the same broken wolf who had been rejected. She was Lyra Nightshade, and she would not be silenced. The head of the council, Elder Varys, stepped forward. His gaze was cold, almost calculating, but there was something deeper behind it, a fear, a recognition of the power she held. Lyra Nightshade, he said, his voice booming in the silence. You have shown us that you are no ordinary wolf. You have demonstrated control over your magic, but the question remains. Can you control it when it truly matters? Lyra stood tall, her heart steadying as she met his gaze. I have control over my magic, but I will not allow you to control me. The murmurs of the council grew louder, but Elder Varys raised a hand, silencing them. Control, yes. But magic is not just a weapon, Lyra. It is a responsibility. It is a force that cannot be harnessed without consequences. You are not just a wolf with magic. You are a moon witch. That heritage comes with power that the world is not ready for. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The moon witch bloodline. It had been a secret, something passed down through generations, whispered about in hushed tones. But now it was out in the open. The power that ran through her veins was not just a gift. It was a curse, a burden she hadn't known how to carry until now. I am ready, Lyra said, her voice steady, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I will not be controlled by anyone. Not by you, not by anyone. Elder Varys nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. We shall see. With a sharp gesture, he motioned to the enforcers standing by the stone pedestal. One of them stepped forward, a tall man with dark eyes, and placed a stone orb on the pedestal. The orb glowed faintly with an ethereal light, a pulse that seemed to call to Lyra. This, Elder Varys explained, is the trial of the moon, a test not just of your power, but of your heart. To prove you are worthy of the power you seek, you must show us that you can wield it without losing yourself, without succumbing to its darkness. Lyra's pulse quickened. The trial of the moon was legendary. Few had ever passed it, and those who had often did so at great cost. The orb was said to test a wolf's magic, their connection to the moon, and their ability to control the darkest aspects of their power. It wasn't just about strength. It was about choosing to wield it wisely. Kieran stepped forward, his hand brushing Lyra's. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of reassurance through her, grounding her. You can do this, Lyra. I believe in you. She looked up at him, the bond between them strong and undeniable. But this was her fight. She couldn't rely on anyone else, not even Kieran. She had to prove that she could stand on her own, that she was more than just a reject, more than just a girl trying to find her place in a world that wanted to control her. With a deep breath, Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on the glowing orb. It called to her, the power inside it a mirror of the storm that raged within her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the orb, and immediately she felt the rush of magic. At first, it was beautiful, a gentle warmth, like the glow of the full moon. But then, as her emotions surged, the magic began to twist, like ice curling through her veins. She could feel the darkness inside her, the power that threatened to overwhelm her. Control, she whispered to herself. Focus. But the storm inside her only grew stronger. The orb pulsed faster, brighter, as if feeding off her fear, her uncertainty. Her hands shook, and she could feel the ice rising, the blizzard threatening to explode from her. She could feel the danger, the destruction, that came with such raw power. For a moment, it felt like she might lose herself, like the storm inside her would consume her completely. But then she heard Kieran's voice in her mind, steady and unwavering. You are not alone, Lyra. Don't let it control you. Lyra's breath caught, and she pushed against the storm. She could feel the magic, the cold, the ice, the wind. But this time she didn't fight it. She embraced it. The frost spread from her fingertips, not in a chaotic rush, but in a controlled, delicate dance. The blizzard softened, the ice melting into snowflakes that swirled in perfect harmony. The orb's glow faded, its light steady and calm. The trial was over. Lyra faces the trial of the moon, where she's tested not only for her control over her magic, but also for her inner strength. The emotional stakes rise as she learns to balance the power within her without letting it consume her. The council sees her power in its full form. and she proves that she is worthy of the magic she possesses. Let's dive into Chapter 9, where the consequences of Lyra's victory at the trial of the moon unfold. As the tension with the council reaches new heights, Lyra's powers are put to the ultimate test. The bond breaker device and the council's true intentions come into focus, forcing Lyra to confront not only her magical abilities, but also her deepening connection with Kieran. Chapter 9. The air in the council's stronghold was thick with tension. Lyra stood at the center of the grand hall, the echoes of her victory still reverberating in her chest. The trial of the moon had been a success, a victory that not only proved her control over her magic, but also her strength in the face of the council's demands. But as the council elders watched her, there was no joy in their eyes. There was only suspicion and fear. Elder Very's expression remained hard as stone as he stepped forward, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to make the air grow colder. You have passed the trial, Lyra Nightshade. But do not mistake this for acceptance. You have shown us your power, but the price of such power is still unknown. You are dangerous, and that is why you will remain under our supervision. Lyra's pulse quickened, and for a moment, she could feel the storm brewing inside her again, the ice threatening to break free. She had proven herself, but it was never enough. The council would never accept her. She wasn't just a wolf with magic. She was a threat to their control, and that would never change. I will not be controlled, she said, her voice steady but full of defiance. I won't be anyone's pawn, not even yours. The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, the council seemed to falter. The elder's gaze flickered, a flash of uncertainty crossing his features. But that moment passed quickly, and he straightened, the mask of authority falling back into place. Then we shall see, Elder Varys replied. You will have no choice but to prove your loyalty. The council will be watching, and you will be tested again. Lyra's heart sank as the weight of his words hit her. She had hoped for freedom, for acceptance, but it seemed she would never be free of the chains the council sought to impose on her. At that moment, a sudden crash interrupted the tension. The door to the hall burst open, and a figure stepped through. Kieran, his eyes wild with urgency, his presence a stark contrast to the cold, controlled air of the council. Lyra, Kieran shouted, his voice thick with emotion. Get away from them. Now. Lyra turned, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the look in his eyes. A mixture of fear, determination, and something deeper. He didn't need to say anything more. She could feel the pull of danger in the air, the ominous sense that something was about to shatter. The council's enforcers reacted immediately, stepping forward to block the exit, their eyes hard as they glared at Kieran. Stay where you are, one of them barked, his hand reaching for a weapon. But Kieran wasn't having it. In a swift motion, he raised his hand, and the earth beneath them cracked, sending a wave of energy through the room. The enforcers staggered back, caught off guard by the sheer force of his power. Get her out of here, Kieran shouted, his voice full of command. Now, Lyra, go. Lyra didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel and ran, the storm of her magic swirling around her like a living entity. She could feel the cold rising from within, the power threatening to burst free. But she wasn't just running from the council now. She was running towards freedom, towards choosing her own fate. As she sprinted through the hall, Kieran at her side, the council's enforcers closed in, their weapons drawn. But Kieran was with her, and together, they were a force to be reckoned with. No, Elder Varys shouted, his voice laced with fury. You will not escape. This is not over, Lyra Nightshade. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the storm inside her growing, threatening to consume everything. But she couldn't lose control, not now. She wouldn't let her magic be used against her. In the distance, she could see the entrance, freedom, just beyond the stone gates. But before they could reach it, a flash of light burst through the hall. A weapon, a device designed to sever the mate bond, crashed to the floor, its cold steel glinting ominously. No, Lyra cried, instinctively summoning her magic. The coldness shot through her veins, her hands glowing with the frozen power she had learned to control. The bond breaker was a weapon created to tear apart the deepest connections, to sever the very essence of a werewolf's soul. She reached out with her magic, her powers rising in a violent surge. The storm around her intensified, the blizzard growing as she harnessed the energy of the earth beneath her. Snowflakes swirled in the air, turning into ice spears that shot forward, breaking the bond breaker into pieces. The sound of shattering metal echoed through the hall as the device crumbled into dust. The council's enforcers fell back, eyes wide with shock. But the fury inside Lyra had only just begun. Her magic was no longer just about control. It was about survival. The cold, the storm, it was all part of her now. The council had tried to control her, to use her. But they had failed. With a roar, Lyra let the storm burst free. The power surged through her, a blinding wave of energy that tore through the hall. The blizzard intensified, frost spreading over the walls, the floor cracking beneath her feet as the temperature plummeted. Kieran stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with admiration and something more. A connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. "You're unstoppable, Lyra," he said, his voice full of awe. Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with something more than just gratitude. This power wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been held captive by the council's control. It was for freedom, for hope. She would never be their puppet again. Let's continue the journey with Chapter 10, where the full weight of Lyra's transformation is realized. The final battle approaches, and the intensity reaches its peak as Lyra faces the council and her ex-mate, all while navigating the growing power of her magic and her deepening connection with Kieran. Chapter 10. The storm raged in her chest, the cold winds of her magic swirling around her like a living, breathing force. Lyra could feel the power pulsing through her veins, more intense than ever before, but it was different now. It was no longer just ice. It was her, an extension of her emotions, her strength, and her will. The council's stronghold was in chaos. The walls that had once felt impenetrable were now covered in frost, the icy tendrils of her power creeping into every corner of the fortress. The council had tried to control her, to break her, but they had underestimated the force that she was becoming. Lyra stood at the center of the hall, her magic crackling in the air, the blizzard around her now fully under her control. The council had come to test her, to prove her worth, but she had proven more than they had bargained for. They had never expected her to turn her power against them. Not like this. Kieran stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the midst of the storm. His gaze never left her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and something more, something that Lyra didn't have the courage to define yet. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a new world, a world where no one would be controlled or oppressed by the likes of the council. The council's enforcers had retreated to the back, but the elders remained, their faces hard as stone. Elder Varys stepped forward, his expression filled with something between fury and fear. "You've made your point, Lyra Nightshade," he said, his voice cold but tinged with a hint of desperation. "But this is not the way. You've defied us. You've defiled the order we've built." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. "Your order is built on control and fear. It's time it ended." The wind howled around her as the power inside her surged, an unstoppable tide of magic. The council had no idea what they were up against. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair, stepped forward, her eyes burning with a cold fury. "You're nothing but a weapon, Lyra. Your power is a curse, not a gift." Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. She could feel the magic surging through her, ready to explode, ready to show them just how wrong they were. "You're wrong," she said, her voice low but full of strength. "My power is my freedom, and I will never let you take it from me again." The temperature dropped suddenly, the air thick with the weight of her magic. The blizzard intensified, swirling around the room, the ice creeping up the walls and floor. The council's elders raised their hands, summoning their own magic in response, but it was no match for the force that Lyra had become. Elder Varys moved quickly, his face hardening as he raised a staff made of dark, jagged stone. He slammed it into the ground, and the energy in the room shifted, darkening the air. Lyra felt a sharp pull in her chest. This wasn't just about magic. It was about something deeper. Control. "You're a mistake, Lyra." Varys' voice cracked with anger. "You should never have been allowed to live. You should never have been allowed to wield this kind of power." Lyra's eyes locked onto him, her fists clenched tightly, ice spreading beneath her feet. "I will not be controlled." With a sharp movement, she summoned the full force of her magic. The blizzard ripped through the room, a roaring storm of ice and snow. The council's energy shields faltered, and Lyra's magic tore through them like paper, freezing the air, creating barriers of ice and snow that blocked the council's attacks. The battle had begun in earnest. Kieran moved beside her, his presence an unspoken support as they fought together. His power, though not magical like hers, was something else, something grounded, something that balanced her storm. He fought with precision, taking down enforcers who dared to get too close, his moves fluid and graceful despite the chaos. But even as Lyra's magic tore through the hall, her mind was focused. The storm was hers to control. The ice didn't define her. It was a part of her, but not the whole of who she was. The council had made that mistake. They had seen her as just a weapon. They had never understood what true power was. The council elders regrouped, but they were no match for her now. Lyra's magic was a force of nature, unstoppable, uncontrollable. With each wave of her hands, ice barriers rose, shards of frozen magic forming intricate patterns in the air, like a living, breathing piece of her soul. Then, as the final moment approached, a sudden flicker of recognition hit Lyra. She turned to face the doorway, where Marcus stood, his face pale with shock and disbelief. He was no longer the alpha who had rejected her. The bond breaker device had already failed, but this was different. Lyra's heart clenched as their eyes met. She saw the guilt in his expression, the regret, but it was too late. The bond between them had already been shattered. There was no going back. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, Lyra raised her hand. Ice swirled around her fingers, a controlled, deliberate manifestation of power. "Don't speak," she whispered, her voice steady. "You've already made your choice. And I've made mine." The magic pulsed from her in one final burst, a blizzard that shattered the last remnants of the council's resistance. The battle was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra fully unleashing her power in a battle against the council, proving that she is not just a weapon, but a force to be reckoned with. As she faces her past, including the presence of Marcus, she makes a final stand for her freedom and the future she chooses. Chapter 11. The hall was silent. The storm that had raged through the council's stronghold had finally subsided, leaving nothing but the remnants of a shattered legacy. Ice covered the floors, the walls, the air itself. Everything was frozen, still, as if the world had come to a complete halt. Lyra stood at the center of the room, her hands trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer force of what she had just done. The battle was over, but the cost was clear. The council had been brought to its knees, its elders defeated, their control broken. The bond breaker lay in pieces at her feet, a symbol of the past she had left behind. Kieran stood beside her, his eyes never leaving her face. The warmth of his presence was a stark contrast to the icy winds that still blew softly through the broken windows. "You did it," he said softly, his voice full of admiration. Lyra nodded, though the weight of it all was still sinking in. "We did it," she corrected. "Without him, none of this would have been possible." His strength had been her anchor when everything felt like it was falling apart. She took a deep breath, letting the last remnants of the storm dissipate. The ice around her melted, the temperature in the hall rising as her magic slowly returned to its dormant state. "You're free," Kieran said, his voice quiet, but full of emotion. Lyra turned to face him, the realization hitting her like a wave. She had spent so long running, fighting, proving herself. But now she had achieved something far greater than any victory. She had claimed her freedom. She had chosen her own path. "I am," she whispered, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "But so are you. We both are." Kieran's expression softened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. There was no council, no past, no looming threat. There was just the two of them, standing together, the future open before them. "Lyra," Kieran said, his voice filled with a tenderness that made her heart skip a beat. "There's something I need to say." She raised an eyebrow, her heart racing. "What is it?" Kieran stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers. "You don't have to be alone anymore. You never have to fight alone again." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had fought so hard to protect herself, to prove that she didn't need anyone. But standing here with Kieran, she realized something important. She didn't have to be alone. She had found someone who saw her for who she truly was, someone who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. "I never want to be alone again," she whispered, her heart swelling with the truth of her words. Kieran smiled, his eyes soft and warm. "Then don't be." He leaned in, brushing a gentle kiss against her forehead. The world around them seemed to fade away as they stood there, connected not just by magic, but by something deeper, something unspoken. Their bond wasn't just about power. It was about trust, respect, and love. The sound of footsteps interrupted the moment, and Lyra turned to see a group of wolves emerging from the shadows. They were the ones who had fought alongside her, the ones who had stood by her when everything seemed lost. The survivors of the pack she had once been a part of, but who had now pledged their loyalty to her and Kieran. One of the wolves, a fierce female warrior who had been with Lyra from the beginning, stepped forward, a smile tugging at her lips. "We're with you, Lyra. We've always been." Lyra's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked at the faces of those who had supported her. These wolves were more than just allies. They were family, a chosen family that she had built from the ground up. Together, they would rebuild, not just the pack, but the world they had fought for. "It's time," Lyra said, her voice full of conviction. "We rebuild. We create something new. Something better." Kieran nodded, his hand still holding hers. Together, as the sun began to rise, casting a soft golden light over the frozen world around them, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. They had fought for freedom, for control, for the right to choose their own fate. And now they had it. Epilogue, a new era. 6 months had passed since the battle at the Council's stronghold, and the world had changed. The winds of freedom had swept through the once impenetrable walls of the Council's fortress, and the world of magic had been forever altered. Lyra stood at the edge of a cliff, the soft morning light filtering through the trees behind her. The horizon stretched out before her, endless and full of possibility. Below, the sanctuary they had built from the ashes of their past was alive with activity. A place of refuge for those who had been oppressed, for those who had been cast aside by the old ways. The pack had grown, no longer confined to the traditions of the past. They had found a new purpose, one that went beyond survival. They were a community now, family, bound by choice and trust, not blood. Lyra had given them hope, and they had given her something in return, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. Kieran approached her, his steps steady, his presence a constant comfort. He had become not just her partner in battle, but her equal in everything. They had built something together, something far stronger than anything the Council had ever tried to create. A future where they were free to choose their own path. Lyra turned to face him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and love. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Kieran nodded, his eyes soft. "It is. You did this, Lyra. You brought us all together." She smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We did it together. All of us." He took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. The bond between them had only grown stronger with time, their connection undeniable. There were no more secrets between them, no more walls to hide behind. They had faced the storm together, and they had come out on the other side, stronger than ever. Lyra glanced down at the sanctuary below, her mind drifting back to the days before all of this. To the days when she had been alone, unsure of herself, rejected by the world she had known. But now, standing here with Kieran at her side, she knew who she was. She wasn't just a wolf with magic. She wasn't just a broken soul trying to find her way. She was Lyra Nightshade, a force in her own right, a leader of a new world, one where power was used to protect and to uplift, not to control and destroy. The magic within her was no longer a curse. It was a gift, her gift. "Are you ready?" Kieran asked, his voice low but filled with anticipation. Lyra nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "I am." Together, they turned toward the future, the first light of the new day casting a warm glow over their path. They weren't alone anymore. They had each other, and they had the strength to build a world of their own making. A world where no one would ever have to fight for freedom again. The storm had passed. The blizzard had melted into the warmth of hope. And in its place, a new dawn had risen. End of the story. Rejected Omega, saved by a ruthless Alpha, who never knew she was the Ice Queen. Her power, her past, hidden in the storm, now unleashed in a journey untold. From betrayal to strength, from fear to pride, she rises, her magic no longer denied. A love built on fire, an unbroken bond, where trust is forged and destinies respond. So if you've been moved by her tale, please subscribe, like, and comment without fail. Your support is what makes this journey real, and we'll keep you updated on stories to feel. Share this adventure, spread it wide, so we can continue this magical ride.